Hello and welcome to the Bob Edwards Show for Monday, October 31st. We are the United States of America, where bigger is better. Big cars, big homes, big deals are what we want in the land of wretched excess. If you've got it, supersize it. My guest today is Ronald Bishop, author of More, The Vanishing of Scale in an Over-the-Top Nation, a book that explores our society's obsession with triviality, extravagance, and spectacle. And if that's not scary enough for Halloween, I'm also talking with Amy Stewart, author of Wicked Bugs, the Louse That Conquered Napoleon's Army, and Other Diabolical Insects. We'll discuss creatures that pester us, destroy our food, and give us deadly diseases. Ronald Bishop is a former journalist who teaches communication at Drexel University. More is a book-length treatment of the media's obsession with both triviality and extravagance, which he says is eroding the middle ground where ordinary or casual or private behavior used to be. Today, says Bishop, you're not really a sports fan unless your chest is painted. You're not really cooking unless you're using restaurant-grade appliances and cutlery. You're not really renovating unless you're tearing down to the studs and upgrading to granite. Just ask ESPN or the Food Network or HGTV. I asked Ronald Bishop what inspired him to write More.
Well, it's funny. I had been collecting examples, I guess. I'm sort of a pack rat when it comes to my research, and had been accumulating examples of what I thought was the media's encouragement, or at least portrayal of, as the title of the book, or the subtitle, I guess, suggests, over-the-top behavior. Tiger Woods was actually one of the key starting points in how we, and sports writers at the time, and this was before his marital troubles and the decline of his game, how sports fans and folks I knew who were big golfers just really loved the fact that he was so intense and so focused on his game, and seemed to be every waking moment practicing or doing something to tweak his game. And I just from there moved sort of all over the map, collecting examples of television ads, magazine ads, all aimed, at least in my mind, towards not promotion so much, but at least the portrayal of having to do everything with zeal or gusto rather than just sort of enjoying things. So that's where it began.
Explain what you mean when you use the term vanishing scale.
Well, it's sort of an offshoot of my wife and I are big fans of how-to shows on HGTV and other places, and I sort of use the analogy of a room and furniture, and how sometimes when there's a piece of furniture in a room that seems too big for the room, it's out of scale. And from there, I sort of had a little bit of license with thinking about experiences as they're portrayed in the media as generally having to be very significant or undertaken with a great degree of intensity, whether it's being a fan of a sports team or enjoying food or even undertaking weight loss or politics or journalism as intensity, as just with full throttle zeal.
You write that most people have no clue that our modern sense of scale is even out of whack. How so?
Well, I think it just comes from maybe the immersion in the messages. I mean, I do admit freely that the book has a definite romantic tone for the simple days of yesteryear, I guess, but that over time, and particularly in my line of work in education, I see parents, especially ironically, I guess, those of us who are baby boomers, constantly pressuring their kids to do better and go to the right college and take the right classes and on down the line. And I think we do it for so long, and we just undertake these activities with such gusto that we rarely get the chance to kind of step back, given how full a lot of our plates are these days.
Full plates indeed. One of the many examples you give in the book to illustrate your point is the evolution of fast food. Could you talk more about that?
Yes. One of the things that I've noticed along the way is, one particular example when it comes to fast food in particular is the vanishing of small. There doesn't seem to be a small anymore. I mean, there is a small when you go to McDonald's or your favorite fast food restaurant, but large has become even larger, and they're supersized. And Morgan Spurlock, of course, has documented this quite nicely in his excellent films. But there just seems to be in that area just an absence of small. And thinking about just the idea of being a foodie, it's not enough. I have many students who are just wonderful people who are far more into food than I ever was, or ever have been, I guess. They just, talk about it and blog about it and try to experience, which is a good thing in college, of course.
In fact, there's a food channel, of course.
Yes, and now a cooking channel to go with it. And just to observe, one of the things that I do talk about in one of the chapters is just observing the behaviors and of the folks who are on those channels and how they sort of treat or approach the act of cooking. And it's wonderful to watch. As I've hinted at before, we're big fans, but someone like Guy Fieri, he just really enjoys the heck out of food. And there's just no room for, this is tasty. It has to be sort of...
is that the Glutton Show?
No, he's the one, Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives.
Yeah.
I can never say correctly, but he's a really entertaining guy, and he's a talented chef.
He's been on the show. I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, he has the spiky blonde hair and all the bling, I guess. I don't know if anybody still says that, but anyway, he's really zealot, maybe a little strong, but he certainly is a devotee, I guess, and wants to convey that intense love for food to his audience, which is a perfectly, wonderful mission. But one of the things that I not so much worry about, but I'm curious about, is how that sort of pushes less zealous folks in all of these areas sort of to the sidelines, a more nuanced, I guess, view of the world, or someone, as in sports fans, there doesn't seem, when you watch a football game or any kind of sports contest, you don't see a lot, and maybe there aren't that many, perhaps, but you don't see a lot of people who are just kind of there enjoying the game and cheering their team on. You invariably see or read descriptions of the foam finger waving fan dressed in all the latest gear with face paint and, shouting at the camera, which again, totally, I've done a few of those things in my time, but it kind of pushes to continue the sports metaphor, I guess, to the sidelines, folks who just want to kind of go and enjoy the game.
But gee, that's where the word fan came from fanatic.
Absolutely. And I am a very proud, and I hope I'm not alienating any fans out there, but I'm a very proud New York Mets fan and enjoy, I've followed them since I was a little kid. And when I was younger, every year we would go through the ritual. My grandmother, when she was alive, would help me buy the Mets yearbook every year. And one of the things I do mention in the book is that the list of goodies that you could get, or souvenirs, which is a much, less aggressive word than gear, I guess, these days, but was very short. There were about 9 or 10 items that you could get: a bobbing head doll and a windbreaker and the batting helmet that you're not supposed to wear in actual competition. And I had a lot of that stuff, I guess, but it's become much, much more almost sort of semi-required that in order to be considered a true fan or a devoted, dedicated fan of whatever it is, whichever team it is, you have to buy the latest stuff and flaunt it. And there could be an element of, I'm paying so much money for these tickets already, I'm entitled to act boorishly in some instances, not all, and, make my fanship well known. But it certainly is a somewhat different take, I guess, in the media on, and this is across. It's not just sports. It's certainly, being a fan of celebrities or being a fan of a recording artist. The fan portrayals of fans are much more aimed at or center on, the devoted, almost mindless fan who follows, practically stalks their favorite artist or athlete anywhere. And again, I'm not saying that casual fans don't exist. I'm just saying in terms of the messages that are selected for presentation, we usually get the foam finger wearing folks.
You like the promos done by ESPN, Never Graduate?
Yes, that's in my line of work, that's not a good thing. No, it's I talk about this in my sports writing class here at Drexel, that there's not a lot of room on the sports journalism side anymore for reporters who aren't fully immersed in the game or in the team that they cover. If they're a beat writer, for example, that I had a good friend of mine who wrote for years for the Philadelphia Daily News come and talk to my class. He'd covered the Flyers when they were winning the Stanley Cups back in the 70s. And one of the things that shocked my students in the class was that when they asked him who he was a fan of, which teams he rooted for, and he grew up in Philadelphia, went to Roman Catholic high school, and, has lived in the area his whole life, he told them that he wasn't a fan of, when he was working, he wasn't a fan of that team. I mean, he was, but he tried to create that sort of detachment or critical distance that enabled him to do his job. And this, for a group of, very talented, wonderful young people who are, looking to become the next Stuart Scott or work for ESPN, that really didn't go over too well. And they were stunned that, that objectivity was a prerequisite, at least when my friend was working for the gig. Not to say it doesn't exist anymore, but it's I've definitely observed and still have lots of former students in the field that they're sort of expected to be folks cheering along, with the teams that they cover.
A homer, we call it.
Yes, exactly. That used to be a term of derision, actually, when I was several centuries ago, and I worked I cut my teeth as a sports writer. That was unacceptable behavior, and especially in broadcast sports journalism, there's a large aspect of homer. What's a better word, perhaps? That you want to. It's almost a wannabe mentality that you want to put that out there as part of your performance.
I'm speaking with Ronald Bishop about triviality, extravagance, and his book, More. We'll continue after a short break. Welcome back. My guest is Ronald Bishop. He's a former journalist who teaches communication at Drexel University, and he's just written More, the Vanishing Scale in an Over-the-Top Nation. More looks at the chipping away of what's considered normal or ordinary or middling. Bishop wonders if we're able to do anything casually anymore.
Your first chapter deals with multiple births, and you call this a pro-natalist country, but people are having fewer children, right? So how does that square?
Well, I think history kind of tells us that is true, and there's certainly no denying the statistics, but as far as the portrayal of parenthood or the desire or the act of having children, it's still promoted. Kids are, they're underfoot and they can be, troublesome sometimes, but they're expected.
You compare today's media frenzy over the so-called Octomom with a multiple birth story from the 1930s that seems just as frenetic. The story even involved a theme park called Quintland.
Yes, the Dion quintuplets in Canada. It's a somewhat troubling story, I guess, much like the Octomom, but one of the common elements is the degree to which the folks surrounding both families, and in the Octomom's case, I guess a lot of it was of her own volition, decided to turn the birth of the children into, as you pointed out, a spectacle, rather than just having the babies and going home.
Well, it was the reason she had the babies.
Yes, exactly.
To get a reality show.
Right. Which is its own discussion. Mm-hmm. And fortunately, I'm not a trained psychologist, so I couldn't pick that apart too well. But culturally, it just the reactions were the same to a degree. I mean, there was a lot of it was a different country. It was Canada with the Dionnes, but they were world famous for a long time. I mean, they actually had a pen or a glassed-in area where folks could come and pay their money to watch them just play. I mean, it was there was a little bit of grassy space, and then they were, their beds and the cribs and stuff, and they would just, people would pay good money just to come watch them be the Dion quintuplets. I guess the advantage, and I use that word very carefully, that the Octomom had was that she had a much larger, more diverse media, more, I guess, voracious media out there, just sort of waiting for her every move. But that didn't stop a lot of, as I mentioned in the chapter, a lot of the folks who observed her behavior from being extremely critical, absolutely think whatever folks like to think about her motivations. But the media certainly did give her a hard time.
Well, all this stuff you talk about is media-driven, isn't it?
Yeah, it's again, not to say that, folks who are avid media consumers are automatically going to engage in these behaviors. Those models in communication research just don't hold a lot of water. But the just the idea that this is sort of the dominant approach to life, I guess, that is encouraged and promoted across much of the media landscape today, that whatever behavior you engage in has to be done, full out rather than, maybe more nuanced or subtly, or you have to have 8 kids instead of 1, and on down the line.
You write, a byproduct of this intensity is a growing inability to see the historical and cultural connections between ideas, things, experiences, and events. Can you talk more about that?
Well, I think that going back briefly, I guess, to the Octomom and the Dionnes, that there is a history of certainly exploitation of folks who have multiple births. I'm not sure that's correctly put, but that in the case of the Dionnes, it was the doctor who delivered them that turned them into the spectacle, whereas the Octomom sort of did it on her own with the help of TMZ and associated celebrity media. But I think in addition to all of those things, I think the other worry I have, I guess, is that it also doesn't do anything for our ability to get genuinely outraged at behavior that, is destructive in addition to being over the top. The historical linkages and context really, because the media are so entertainment driven, with this behavior or this approach to life very much at the forefront, it doesn't give us a lot of space, mentally or otherwise, to see the linkages, see the history of where a lot of this comes from. I mean, the quote at the beginning of the book is from Justice Louis Brandeis, of all people, and I mentioned in the introduction that it's, even in my mind, maybe a little bit of a dubious connection, but he warned back in a case in the late 1920s that we should be sort of on the lookout for folks who approach life with, he was speaking specific to a case, of course, but that approach life with that much zeal. And it's become the norm, I think, at least in terms of the depiction of life, the narrative of life that we see across all the media. And it just kind of leaves us, since we're so busy, we don't have, or theoretically, according to what the media are saying, we don't have a lot of time to sit back and watch or think about or consider the context of that informs where we are.
Is that what happened to political discourse?
I think in a way. I mean, we in classes with my wonderful freshmen, we talk a lot about, the Kennedy-Nixon debates as sort of one of those turning points. And I know that there was a great review of Joe McGinnis's book, I think in the Times this week, talking about that moment as being the turning point in American politics, and the focus shifts to image and image makers and movies like The Candidate and Bulworth and on down the line. But yeah, I think that is a big reason why political discourse has turned into a battle of, ideological extremes in a lot of ways, that folks, and we saw this certainly with the debt crisis and actually practically any issue these days, where people stake out their positions and they brandish their talking points and they go out on the stump, certainly during the lead up to the passage of Obamacare in 2009, and we just shout at each other, and there's not a lot of room, or at least the suggestion is made, just to qualify that correctly, that there's just not a lot of space given, I guess is a better way to say it, for people who just want to do nuance and say, well, here's what this really means, and here are the facts. Instead, we get lots of shouting and lots of screaming, and one of the, as a former journalist and as a journalism teacher, one of the semi-sad, I guess, ironies of the whole thing is now the nation turns to Jon Stewart, who is a very talented, very smart, very gifted comedian, for political advice, basically, or the kind of information that, journalists should be, and not all journalists, and I don't mean it as an indictment, should be giving us in larger doses to at least shine a light on the foibles and the poor behavior and the bad choices and all of that stuff that makes up the political world. And he'd be the first to tell you, I think, at least based on what I've read, that he doesn't wear that mantle, by choice. He will constantly be saying he's a comedian, and the rest of the world takes him far more seriously.
You raised the question, are we capable of doing anything casually anymore? There's casual sex, isn't there? Is that still around?
Well, yes, I guess. It's an excellent question and very loaded. I would say so, and I would not encourage my students, if they're listening, to engage in that without proper protection. But even to take it just a little further down that road, pornography and sexual or sexually expressive, behavior on television. I am absolutely, not a prude, and it's all fine by me, but even that is, maybe you can make the argument, and not to sound like, the Family Television Council or Parents Television Council, but it's maybe a little more out there and in our faces, I guess, than it might have been. Subtlety there is sort of a lost art, and that, there's maybe a little bit of room for good old-fashioned romance,
But there's still mediocrity and laziness out there. How do you square that with the excessiveness?
Well, that kind of brings me back to the discussion and the thoughts that I've had with a lot of folks in my line of work about education and how the act of education is to be undertaken. In some of the movies of recent vintage that have come out that are centered in schools, like Freedom Writers, and I mentioned Dead Poets Society, I think, too, in the book, one of my favorite films, that, the mediocrity is sort of treated as kind of a temporary way station. It's almost treated as if it doesn't exist, that eventually you'll get it right. Eventually you'll, be visited by a great teacher who will, lift you up and kickstart your brain and, get you to think and move past your station in life, and life will be great. But that doesn't leave a lot of room for the folks who are, to paraphrase Garrison Keillor, just sort of above average.
Are there any positive representations of over-the-top behavior?
Well, I think one that might come to mind is when the celebration of, for example, the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and the celebrations that ensued there. There certainly is room for genuine, outpourings of great emotion. I guess one of the things that is sort of at the heart of the book is that we don't see anything but, and that brings me sort of back to sports. I was noticing the other night, I was watching Baylor play, I forget who it was, but they weren't expected to win the game, and they rallied and they beat this heavily favored and highly ranked team. But it was only the first game of the season, and even though, the fans at Baylor, they're usually not a national power, but they rushed the field and tore down the goalposts, and that seems to be a nice metaphor for how we approach kind of everything. That, if every event is super special and has to be reacted to with, such over-the-top behavior, then you can make the argument that maybe none of them are, that we treat them all so much like cataclysmic events that we can't see the nuances or the differences or truly appreciate them. We just sort of, climb the goalposts and celebrate with our fellow fans.
Well, you can understand Baylor being, having a need for release. I think you're not allowed to dance in Baylor.
Well, I think and this is sort of a shout out to, they published my book. They're maybe a trifle less, what's the right word, restrictive, I guess, as opposed to maybe something like BYU, where the young man was thrown off the basketball team last spring for having consensual sex with his girlfriend.
Gracious.
Imagine. It's the horrors. But it does highlight to me that, especially as a lifelong sports fan, that the reactions of fans and even of players, I'm not sure if there are any statistics about the number of bench clearing brawls or, fights in hockey or whatever, but it certainly seems as though the default anymore is a on-field celebration whenever, even if it's a mid-season game, that folks are in. We actually have a group at Drexel of really wonderful kids who go to every game. They all wear Drexel colors, their T-shirts, yellow and blue, or gold and blue, and they cheer like crazy for any Drexel team, that they're attending a game for. And their devotion to the school is heartwarming, but it's also kind of an interesting commentary on how they conceive of support and devotion, that it can't be just me sitting there waving a pennant, and not to sound like it's 1895, but it's a cultural expectation that if you're a sports fan, or the Cameron Crazies at Duke, and the same thing, maybe even larger numbers, where that's how fans behave, and that's certainly the message we get from 24-hour sports networks like ESPN.
So how did you research this book? Many hours of guilty pleasure television watching?
It certainly was. Pleasure is the right word. And I'm very fortunate to have a dean and a department head at Drexel who kind of let me wander around and pick through the professor of mine at Fordham, George Gordon, once said that the really cool thing about communications research is that you get to sort of pick through the trash or go through the junkyard, I guess. That was his metaphor. But yeah, it was, I wanted to make sure that there was a certain amount of intellectual rigor, at least to serve as a foundation for these ideas. But the vast majority of it was just sort of trying to come up with, a common thread, and then from sort of sifting through all of these examples that I had found. It really was of the three that I've written, most fun to write.
Thank you very much.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you, Bob.
Ronald Bishop. His book is More, The Vanishing Scale in an Over-the-Top Nation. Next, Wicked Bugs.
Welcome back.